He was a respected pastor, the kind of man people trusted with their deepest sins. She was his devoted wife, loyal to his ministry and to his name. But one night, inside their quiet home, he walked in on something that shattered his faith and twisted his mind beyond reason. What he claimed to see made him believe that the woman he married was not who she seemed to be. And in his desperate attempt to cleanse what he thought was an unforgivable sin, he carried out an act so brutal, so shocking that it would leave their community haunted forever. This is not just a crime. This is a story of faith, obsession, and a horrifying choice that ended in flames. Welcome back to Dark Motives, the place where we uncover the darkest true crime stories that many would rather forget. If you love deep dives into shocking cases just like this one, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss when a new episode is released. And while you are here, comment below where you are watching from. I want to know where our viewers are tuning in. It helps build this community and keeps these stories alive. Now, let's step deeper into this case because what you are about to hear will make you question how far faith, fear, and obsession can push a person. Our story begins in Houston, Texas, a city known for its churches, faith communities, and the kind of pastors who are treated like leaders of entire neighborhoods. Among them was Pastor David Harper, a man whose sermons could fill pews and stir emotions with every word. He wasn't the richest or the most famous, but in his corner of Houston he was respected, trusted, and looked at as a man who walked closely with God. Beside him was his wife, Ruth. She was gentle, soft-spoken, and seen by many as the perfect pastor's wife. She worked in the choir, hosted prayer groups in their home, and rarely missed a single church activity. From the outside, their marriage seemed like a shining example of faith and family. But what no one saw was the pressure that came with living under constant judgment. Every word, every action, every detail of their private lives was expected to line up with Scripture. And in that environment, even the smallest secret, the smallest difference, could feel like a dangerous weight waiting to be exposed. For years, the Harpers lived under that pressure, wearing the mask of perfection. Until one night, inside their Houston home, that mask shattered forever. At first, the Harper household looked like any other family home in Houston. They smiled at church, they prayed together in public, and they held hands when people were watching. But behind closed doors, Ruth was growing tired. She was tired of the constant image, tired of living up to perfection that could never be reached. She wanted to breathe like a normal woman, but David could not accept that. To him, she wasn't just his wife. She was the first lady of the church, and her every move reflected on his ministry. David began to notice little things. A tone in her voice that sounded sharper than before. A look in her eyes that didn't carry the same softness. He convinced himself these were signs, warnings that she was slipping away from the role he expected her to play. His sermons became stricter, his prayers louder, but when he returned home, he carried with him a suspicion that refused to leave his heart. What made it worse was the whispers. Members of the church who quietly suggested that Ruth seemed different, that something about her spirit was changing. These comments only fueled David's obsession. He watched her every step, questioned her every choice, and convinced himself that she was hiding something. For him, it was no longer about love. It was about control, about making sure that what he built as a pastor would never collapse under the weight of his wife's hidden truth. The more David watched her, the more he became paranoid. Ruth's smallest actions, like staying longer at the store or missing a phone call, were twisted into proof of something larger. He stopped seeing her as a partner and started seeing her as a puzzle that needed solving, a secret waiting to be revealed. By the time weeks turned into months, David was no longer just a husband. He was an investigator in his own home, a man consumed by the belief that his wife was deceiving him. And when the moment of discovery finally came, it would not only break their marriage, it would ignite a fire that would consume them both. It was late, past midnight, when David returned home after a late-night prayer meeting. The house was silent, the lights dimmed, and everything seemed calm. But as he walked down the hallway, he heard a sound. Not the sound of footsteps, not the sound of movement in the kitchen, but something that drew him closer, step by step. He pushed open the bathroom door, expecting to see nothing more than his wife brushing her teeth or washing her face. Instead, what he saw froze him in place. Ruth was standing not in the way he expected, not in the way that matched the picture of the woman he thought he married. She was relieving herself, standing upright, her posture steady, as if this was not the first time she had done it. For most people, this might have been confusing, maybe surprising, but to David it was more than that. In that moment, his world cracked in half. His faith told him that the roles of man and woman were divinely set. And now what he witnessed convinced him that his wife had deceived him all along, that she was not the woman he had built his life and ministry upon. Shock turned to anger, and anger turned to terror. David staggered back, whispering to himself, his voice trembling as he called on God, asking if this was a test or a curse placed upon his household. Ruth noticed him, her face caught between shame and fear, and she tried to explain. But her words could not reach him. His ears were closed, his mind spiraling deeper into a storm of rage and disbelief. In that single night, the pastor who preached forgiveness and grace could not find either. Instead, he convinced himself that the only way to cleanse what he believed was an abomination was to take drastic action. And the choice he made would burn its way into history as one of the most horrifying acts of twisted faith the city of Houston had ever seen. David stormed out of the bathroom, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. He paced the hallway, his lips moving with broken prayers, his hands trembling with rage and confusion. In his mind, Ruth had become something unholy, a danger to his ministry, a stain that had to be removed before it spread any further. He told himself he was not just a husband anymore. He was God's soldier, carrying out a command that no one else could see. He returned moments later with a small container of kerosene, one he normally kept for their old backyard grill. Ruth's eyes widened as he unscrewed the cap, the smell filling the room instantly. She pleaded with him, her voice shaking, tears running down her cheeks. She begged him to listen, to understand, to remember the years of love they had shared. But David's mind was already gone, twisted into believing this was a sacrifice he had to make. He poured the liquid across the floor, letting it splash against the walls, letting it soak into her nightgown. The fumes grew heavy, filling the house with a suffocating thickness. Ruth screamed his name, clawing at his arm, but he shoved her back with the strength of a man convinced that heaven itself was watching. Then came the match, a single strike, a tiny spark in the silence of the room, followed by the whoosh of flames erupting into the air. In seconds, the house became an inferno. Ruth's screams filled the night, echoing through the neighborhood, drawing startled eyes to the glowing blaze that consumed their home. By the time neighbors rushed to the scene, it was too late. The fire had already claimed its victim. Ruth's life ended in smoke and ash. Her final moments burned into the memories of those who heard her cries. And David, standing outside, his clothes singed, his hands shaking, told anyone who would listen that he had done it to cleanse his household, to restore his faith, to atone for a sin that existed only in his own tormented mind. By sunrise, the quiet street in Houston was lined with flashing red and blue lights. Firefighters sifted through the smoldering remains of the Harper home, their boots crunching on the ash, their faces grim. Among the debris, they found what everyone feared, the charred remains of Ruth Harper, a woman the congregation once called a model of faith. News spread quickly. Members of the church gathered outside the ruins, their faces frozen in disbelief. They whispered in circles, asking how a man who preached love and salvation could allow such destruction to happen inside his own walls. Some defended him, saying he must have been under spiritual attack. Others shook their heads, certain that this was not the work of God, but the madness of a man who had lost control. Police wasted no time questioning David. His clothes reeked of smoke, his hands were blistered, but what stood out most was his calmness. He told officers he had done what was necessary, that his wife was hiding a truth too dark to leave unpunished. His words were cryptic, almost sermon-like, as though he was preaching instead of confessing to murder. Detectives, however, were not interested in scripture. They wanted evidence. They spoke to neighbors who heard Ruth's screams, who saw David standing outside without lifting a hand to save her. They pieced together the timeline, from his arrival after midnight to the flames that consumed the home minutes later. Every statement pointed in one direction. What emerged was not the story of a righteous man purging evil. It was the story of a husband driven by obsession, a man who mistook his own paranoia for divine instruction. And as the investigators closed in, it became clear that David Harper would not be walking back into the pulpit. He would be walking into a courtroom to answer for a crime too monstrous to ignore. The courthouse in Houston was packed. Journalists filled the benches, cameras flashed outside the doors, and members of the Harper congregation sat shoulder to shoulder, waiting to hear what their pastor would say. For weeks, the trial became the center of conversation, not just in the city but across the state. People wanted answers. How could a man who preached salvation turn into a killer who justified murder in the name of God? When David Harper walked into the courtroom, he looked nothing like the fiery pastor his congregation remembered. His once polished suits were replaced with a plain prison uniform. His hands were cuffed, his face tired, but his eyes burned with the same conviction that had fueled the fire. He showed no shame, no regret. Instead, he carried himself like a man who believed he was chosen for a mission others could not understand. The prosecution painted him as a cold, calculating husband who turned his house into a furnace and murdered his wife without hesitation. They presented the kerosene can, the burnt remains of her clothing, and the testimony of neighbors who heard her screams. Piece by piece, they laid out a picture of premeditated murder. But when David took the stand, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. His voice was calm, steady, even persuasive, as he spoke of visions, of divine commands, of his duty to cleanse his household of what he called deception. He insisted that Ruth was living a lie, that her actions in the bathroom were proof that she was never truly the woman she claimed to be. He said he did not kill her out of hate, but out of obedience. His words chilled the room. Some jurors stared at him in disbelief, others in horror. The congregation members in attendance whispered, some with tears in their eyes, torn between the man they once followed and the monster described in court. And as David continued to speak, one thing became clear. This was not just a trial about murder. It was a trial about a man who twisted faith into fire and tried to pass it off as righteousness. The jury deliberated for hours, locked away in a room where every word of testimony replayed in their minds. They spoke about the fire, the kerosene, the neighbors who heard Ruth's desperate cries. They weighed David's chilling words, his refusal to show remorse, and his insistence that he was acting under God's command. By the time they returned to the courtroom, the air was thick with expectation. The judge asked for the verdict. One by one, the jurors spoke. Guilty of murder in the first degree, guilty of arson, guilty on every charge that had been laid before him. As the words echoed through the chamber, gasps and sobs rose from the congregation members sitting in the gallery. The man they once called pastor was now branded as a killer. David Harper showed no fear, no regret, no breakdown of emotion. Instead, he lifted his eyes toward the ceiling of the courtroom, as though speaking to someone above, whispering silent prayers as the sentence was handed down. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. His future would not be lived in the pulpit, but behind bars, where his words would no longer have the power to ignite crowds or flames. The gavel struck, and the trial was over. Reporters rushed outside to deliver breaking headlines. Church members walked away in silence, their faith shaken, their trust shattered. Some clung to the hope that their pastor had been misled by unseen forces. Others accepted the truth, that David had turned his own twisted obsession into a holy war that only he believed in. For the city of Houston, the verdict was not just about justice. It was a warning, a reminder of how far a person can fall when they allow paranoia and fanaticism to replace reason and love. And for Ruth, it was the closest thing to peace, even if justice had come far too late. When the ashes settled and the courtroom emptied, the story of David and Ruth Harper was left behind as more than just a headline. It became a chilling lesson about the danger of unchecked obsession, about the destruction that can follow when faith is twisted into something it was never meant to be. David was a man trusted with power, with people's hearts, and with the responsibility of guiding souls. But instead of protecting the woman he vowed to love, he turned her into a victim of his own paranoia. What should have been a marriage built on grace and forgiveness ended in fire and screams, leaving a community scarred and a family forever broken. Ruth's story is one that speaks beyond the tragedy. She was a woman silenced by fear, caught in the shadows of her husband's authority, and stripped of her chance to defend herself. Her death forces us to ask how many others live under the weight of control, trapped in homes that look perfect on the outside but hide secrets too dangerous to reveal. And for those who once sat in his church pews, the memory lingers. They saw a man who could inspire with words, who could preach about heaven, but who carried hell inside his own home. Their faith was tested, their trust destroyed, and many walked away with questions they may never find answers to. In the end, this case reminds us that the monsters we fear do not always hide in the shadows. Sometimes they stand in the pulpit, smile in public, and live inside the very houses we believe to be safe. And when their mask slips, the cost is often more than anyone is prepared to pay. The case of Pastor David Harper and his wife Ruth is one that will never be forgotten in Houston, Texas. A story of faith turned into fanaticism, of love turned into fire, and of a man who mistook his own demons for divine commands. Ruth's life was stolen in the most brutal way, and her screams still echo in the minds of those who witnessed the flames that night. But now, I want to hear from you. What do you think about this case? Was David a man consumed by madness, or was he simply hiding behind religion to justify his crime? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And while you are at it, tell us where you are watching from. I read every comment, and your voice matters in keeping these stories alive. If you found this story gripping, and you want more true crime cases just like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Your support helps us bring more of these stories to light, and it keeps this community growing stronger with every video. This has been Dark Motives. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and never forget that sometimes the darkest motives hide in plain sight.